If you know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, you know that changing beliefs isn't the exception, it's the pattern. Rules that were once treated as matters of loyalty later become matters of conscience, and eventually, things that we're told were never really that important to begin with. So this video is less about speculation and more about recognizing that pattern and seeing where it could take Jehovah's Witnesses next. Because we all know that the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses will continue to change in big and small ways. As we kick off a new year, the question is, which beliefs will change next? I'll give my take in just a minute, but first, if you haven't already, if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. Before we talk about what might change in the year ahead, let's be honest about what already has. Because not only can we learn something from what's already changed, but we can also start to see which teachings are under pressure to change next. Now, some of these might seem small or even trivial to non-Jehovah's Witnesses, but if you were a witness, you know that they were anything but. First, we know the organization's policy on beards has already changed. And I gotta be honest, this one used to drive me crazy. Because for decades, witnesses weren't allowed to have a beard without consequences. If you grew a beard, you weren't allowed to have any privileges in the congregation. And let's be honest, you were looked down on as proud, rebellious, and even spiritually weak. Anytime I went to a meeting with stubble or even a shadow, I got comments from the elders.
What's that on your face?
There was one time that an elder actually drove me home after a service group and said that I needed to go shave before I could go in the ministry. Another time, I got pulled out of an assembly partway through to be escorted to a bathroom by an elder with a razor. And he said that I needed to shave my stubble if I wanted to help with parking. Other witnesses told me that they would grow a beard when they saw the governing body with beards. Well, now the governing body has decided that even though it wasn't wrong to begin with, now it's okay for men to have beards. And all of a sudden, every male Jehovah's Witness seems to have a beard. Does that tell you something about the degree of control that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses has over its members? And visually, Jehovah's Witnesses have become even more unrecognizable in recent years. It used to be that men would wear full suits and ties when they would go out in service or to a meeting, and women would wear either a dress or at least a skirt. Again, this was such a presence in my upbringing as a witness that if I ever went to a meeting with just a pair of dress pants, a collared shirt, a tie, and a cardigan, I would get pulled aside and told that I couldn't have privileges that night at the meeting because I didn't have a suit jacket.
You dress like a bum.
Now, the dress and grooming standards have been so relaxed that Jehovah's Witnesses are almost indistinguishable from anyone else in the world. And as of more recently, Jehovah's Witnesses can even toast now. And that might seem like an insignificant change, but here's why it's not. Toasting used to be condemned by the organization as rooted in paganism. And get this, they even linked shunning the custom of toasting with their salvation. Seriously, they plainly said that their Christian narrowness on objectionable customs like toasting was key to their salvation. And as recently as 2007, the organization said, there are valid reasons why Christians do not share in toasting, which has a religious background and even now can be viewed as asking heaven for a blessing, as if seeking aid from a superhuman force. So they went from teaching that toasting could literally compromise someone's salvation to now saying that it's a conscience matter.
After prayerful consideration, the governing body has concluded that there is no need to make a rule regarding toasting and clinking glasses.
And what's so frustrating about this to anyone who was a Jehovah's Witness and is out now is that most of us knew all along that this was never a big deal, that many of these things were never a big deal. We knew that they were arbitrary rules based on illogical reasoning. And if we made that point to anyone, we got shut down, villainized, and told to wait on Jehovah's organization. For something like toasting or beards, sure, you could argue that they're fairly immaterial things. But for even these relatively insignificant things, there were real-world consequences. For example, a 1994 Watchtower shared the story of a Jehovah's Witness woman named Jane and her non-believing husband. The story is that Jane agreed to attend some social functions with her husband, but she refused to compromise her faith on practices like toasting. Jane said, "I knew that occasionally all present are expected to stand and take part in a toast. I had learned that allegiance is due only to Jehovah, and toasting was much more than simply showing respect. My husband realized how awkward the situation could be, so he simply said, 'Don't come.' I obeyed." And situations like that are a dime a dozen. For example, another recent change that the organization made is with reporting hours from the ministry. For decades, Jehovah's Witnesses had to record the time they spent in the ministry every month, write it out on a slip, and give it to an elder in their congregation. This was taken so seriously that if you missed reporting your time even 1 month, your status formally changed to irregular. If you missed 6 months, your status changed to inactive, and the elders would typically investigate. So in other words, the hours you reported were essentially a spiritual measuring stick. But as of November 2023, the requirement for the rank and file to report their hours was removed. Now, that's a frustrating change for anyone who lived through the earlier version of the organization. But even more impactful has been the governing body's position on higher education. Colleges and universities have literally been likened to the instruments of Satan since the founding of Jehovah's Witnesses. And listen, you can take any position you want on higher education. I'm not arguing for or against it in this video. But the point is, if you were a Jehovah's Witness, you couldn't take any position you wanted without fear of being villainized or even penalized. I personally know an elder who allowed his kids to go to university and was removed as a result. Now, the organization has changed its position and calls it a personal decision.
Basically, whether to obtain additional education or not is a matter for personal decision.
But that's what it should have been all along. So my question is, will that elder that I know who let his kids go to university and was removed as a result get an apology? Don't count on it. Because none of these changes came with an apology. None came with an admission of error. They followed the same path every time. First, strict enforcement. Then, inconsistency and language about it being a conscience matter. Finally, total normalization. That pattern hints at what changes we can expect next. So here are 3 Jehovah's Witness teachings that I believe are most likely to change, possibly even this year. First, we have birthdays. Most people know that Jehovah's Witnesses forbid birthday celebrations, but the arguments against it are extremely weak. Biblically, there's no command against celebrating birthdays, no example of Christians being forbidden from acknowledging them, and only 2 negative birthday accounts from the Bible that are descriptive, not prescriptive. Meanwhile, the real impact is felt by children in school or families or really anyone in the workplace. The rule against celebrating birthdays creates a clear, visible separation without any real biblical foundation to justify it. And with the governing body's recent emphasis on principles versus rules,
Jehovah doesn't burden us with endless rules. Instead, He lovingly provides principles in His Word.
It wouldn't really be the least bit surprising to see the policy against birthdays being relaxed or even removed altogether. Personally, I'd be interested to see if active witnesses respond to this as they did toasting, which it seems like they readily embraced, or if they would be frustrated by this change. The next policy of Jehovah's Witnesses that I think could change is shunning. And if you've been paying attention in recent years, you've already started to see the cracks beginning to form. The language about disfellowshipping has been softened to removed. As a side note, I pretty much refuse to use the organization's new language on principle because I feel like it's the governing body rewriting history. I'd rather use the language that was core to my experience as a Jehovah's Witness for 27 years, rather than using whatever new lingo they're throwing around. But regardless of whatever they call it, now you can greet a disfellowship person at the Kingdom Hall, whereas before it felt like you couldn't even smile at them. Some speculate that this softening is due to increased public scrutiny and legal challenges in multiple countries that threaten the organization's charitable tax status. Still, the practice of shunning hasn't been abandoned, at least not yet. Will it ever be gone altogether? Obviously, I would love for that to be the case, but I do have a hard time seeing it. I mean, imagine telling someone who has shunned their kids, their grandkids for decades, lost their entire family. Imagine telling them, just kidding, you can talk to your family again. I don't know how that wouldn't lead to a major backlash by the Jehovah's Witnesses who've been affected by this. But then again, witnesses are conditioned to be fairly accepting of doctrinal changes. But whether it's removed completely or not, I wouldn't be surprised to see the practice of shunning softened, at least somewhat, in the year ahead. Finally, if I had to guess at another change that the organization could make in the year ahead, I think it would be something that would fly under the radar, but would still be a significant change. I'm talking about non-religious holidays like Mother's Day or Father's Day. Because again, with the governing body's pivot on a practice like toasting, they've essentially confirmed that it's more about the intent behind the celebration or practice now, not so much about what it was in the past. So with some of these peripheral holidays where there's not really a religious component and any pagan elements are not as clear, I wouldn't be surprised to see the governing body make a shift and start saying that these are a personal decision. I mean, really, if you think about Mother's Day or Father's Day, the only argument left would be that it's drawing undue attention to one person, which is a similar argument that's made against birthdays. But if you celebrate wedding anniversaries, as Jehovah's Witnesses do, then what's the difference? Is there a line somewhere between celebrating two people versus one person? I don't really see it. Now, if you've watched up to this point and are wondering, why does any of this even matter? Well, here's why. This isn't about mocking Jehovah's Witnesses. It's about questioning where this organization's direction actually comes from. Is it from God, as their leaders claim? Because they say that they're the faithful and discreet slave that Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24, and that they are appointed over the spiritual feeding of all of God's people. But after considering all the evidence, I would argue that another verse in Matthew describes the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses far better. In Matthew 15, verse 14, Jesus spoke of the religious leaders of that time, and he said, "Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit." In that verse, I think Jesus aptly describes the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses, but he also gives the best advice for anyone following them. Leave them. So whether or not we see any major doctrinal changes in the year ahead, the point remains. The governing body's constant doctrinal revisions don't inspire confidence in their leadership. And if there was any doubt before, it confirms they're not receiving any divine guidance from God. And for any Jehovah's Witness watching right now, let me ask you, does the truth require revisions? And who are you ultimately obedient to, God or the governing body? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone you think it could help. And as always, thanks for watching. God bless.